Their new house is haunted, but they didn't know it. Welcome back to the Explanation Pro. Today I'll recap a horror movie called Incarnation from 2022. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The movie begins with a couple arriving at their brand new house. Their names are Brad and Jessica. The two seem over the moon with their new home. Brad goes out to take fresh air and sees an unknown man approaching his door. Brad asks him what he wants, but Brad immediately realizes this is Peter. Peter is the owner of the house. In other words, this is the man who has rented them the property. The house belonged to Peter's father, who had passed away. Then Jessica introduces herself. The woman was not expecting visitors, so the moment catches her off guard. Everyone laughs because of the uncomfortable moment, but Peter seems to be an easy guy all in all. Finally, Peter says goodbye and tells them to look for him in case they need something. Then, the couple is in the backyard. Jess says that she wants to have a garden. However, there's a stump in the middle of the soil, interfering with the project. Brad says he will get rid of it later. Then Jess says that they should name the garden Brad. To this, Brad realizes Jess is talking about having a child, not just a garden. Then, Brad and Jess discuss their business. They want to use a church facility they invested in and turn it into a brew pub. Unfortunately, there's an old woman who's the leader of a committee. She wants to restore the steeple, which will cost half the budget Bard and Jess have invested. That night, Brad and Jess also talk about a strange room in the house. This room has its door locked. Brad was unable to open it. Talking about opening doors, the couple's bedroom door opens all of a sudden. Jess asks if it was the air kicking it, but Brad jokes saying that it was either that or a ghost. Later, Brad goes downstairs, takes a beer out of the fridge, and begins to work on the annoying stump in the garden. Sadly, Brad remembers a traumatic experience from his childhood. We find a young Brad being reprimanded by his father. The father is ordering the child to kill or destroy something with a metal stick. Having to pick the shovel up makes Brad recall that moment. Suddenly, there is a shadowy figure staring at Brad from above, but we don't know what it is. Brad finally goes to sleep, but a thud coming from the unexplored room surprises him. Brad grabs a stick and approaches the room. However, when he was about to try opening the door, it opened on its own. Inside, there are boxes, junk, and strange masks. All of a sudden, Brad sees something. He gets scared and lets his phone drop inside the room. Brad leaves but then returns to get his phone back. This time, however, nothing appears, except for Jess, who gives Brad yet another fright. Brad says there might be a mouse in the house. The next day, while Jess is cooking breakfast, she calls Peter to tell him about the mice issue. As soon as she hangs up, a crow hits a window and perishes. Right after that, Jess hears a noise coming from the upstairs room. Jess leans her hand to open the knob, but once again, the door opens on its own. Jess steps in, but the door closes and she gets trapped inside. Meanwhile, a piece of bread starts burning in the kitchen, so the fire alarm goes on. Jess does her best, but she cannot make it out of the room. Then a black box behind her crawls as if it was alive. Could it have a living being inside? When Jess removes the upper cover, no mouse nor rat was inside. Only an ancient book, strange coins, a knife, and other clutter. Finally, the door opens and Jess seizes her chance to escape. The problem now is that the entire house is full of smoke, causing Jess to faint near the stairs. Brad returns home and panics as soon as he smells and sees the smoke. Fast as lightning, he takes the burning pan out of the oven and places it in the sink. Then, he tries to put a stop to the fire alarm but ends up breaking it. Lastly, Brad goes upstairs and finds his partner on the floor. Luckily, there was no harm at all. The next scene finds Brad and Jess researching information on the golden coins that were inside the box. They discover that those coins are not a currency, but served a religious purpose. Jess also finds out that those coins can be sold at a high price. Brad, however, is not sure about selling them. He prefers asking Peter before. That night, Brad finds himself unable to sleep again. He heads to the living room and checks some papers. He's still worried about their business future. Suddenly, there's a shake. Brad then picks the old book up and reads the scripts out loud. He then grabs a coin, but it seems to burn his hand, so he leaves it on the table. The unexpected moment causes Brad to panic and leave. The next day, Peter repairs the fire alarm. Then, Brad offers him some drinks. There, Brad confesses that he's worried about his wife. She wants to have a baby, but Brad doesn't feel prepared yet. He wants to take care of the business first and then have the baby. But even after that, Brad is worried that the child will inherit his bad things. Peter says that the same happened to him. However, Peter's wife passed away before they could even have a child. Peter now regrets the decision. So, Peter encourages Brad to have the child no matter what. He says that the baby will grow to have Brad's bad things, but also the good parts. Peter then says that his father was not a nice guy to him. Brad says that his father was just the same. Before leaving, Brad asks Peter about the book and the coins. Peter says that those things belonged to his father. He also states that his father used to be in secret societies and occultism, and things he never truly understood. Peter says that he can keep those things if he wants to, they mean nothing to him. Later, Brad discovers that the old lady, who was the director of the Historical Preservation Society, passed away. Brad and Jess still need to pay for the steeple restoration, but the city administrator will provide $900,000 to help them. The two celebrate and dance. When they go to bed, Brad promises they'll have the baby as soon as the business issues are over. Jess is not fully convinced about it but ends up trusting in her husband. However, the couple is unaware that a shadow claw is approaching them. Nonetheless, nothing happens yet. The following day, Jess receives a call. We don't know what's happening, but we can definitely tell it's no good news. Once she hangs up, she seizes the credit card. What will she do with it? Not long after that, Brad receives a message. His card account has been suspended due to a suspicious charge. Brad faces his wife and tells her that the charge is $30,000. It turns out that Jess paid for IVF therapy. This therapy holds Jess' eggs until she's ready to have a baby. If she didn't pay, the laboratory would drop their eggs. Jess did this because she has a condition that seems to prevent her from having children normally. Brad freaks out. They barely had any money for goods and expenses, and now he has to pay $30,000. Brad finally storms out of the house in a feast of anger, leaving Jess crying on her own. At night, Brad begins to drink heavily. He ends up taking the old book and drawing a pentagram and various signs on the floor. Jess wakes up and goes downstairs just to find her husband practicing a ritual. Brad is absolutely drunk. He does his best to apologize for his behavior. Jess seems hesitant but ends up hugging her husband and accepting his apology. Right after that, Brad explains to Jess what he's doing. He explains that after reciting the words of the book out loud, he has contacted an entity. He says that such an entity could provide them with plenty of money. He's convinced about it because Peter's father was a wealthy man who used to play with the occult. Brad concludes that the same may happen to them. When Jess grabs the strange coins, she has visions about her future baby. This is enough to convince her of contacting the entity. Jess is so determined that she even cuts her arm to offer blood for the ritual. Before finishing the ritual, Brad receives a call. It's from one of the investors, who wants to pull himself out of the deal. This discourages the couple, who have the money for the business investment but not for paying their bills. Jess concludes that their only alternative is to ask for Peter's help. So, they invite him for a dinner. When Jessica is cooking, though, her wound begins to bleed. Then, she sees her reflection in the mirror. The reflection is choking herself with her hair. The experience perturbs poor Jess, who says that she won't make it to the dinner. Brad encourages her to rest. He will finish the dinner and eat with Peter alone. Once the dinner is over, Brad tells Peter about their business. Peter insists Brad on going straight to the point. Brad says that he believes Peter could be a great partner. He wants to offer him 20% of the earnings if he invests $200,000 in the business. Peter says that he already has a lot of money. On top of that, he gets angry. He thought Brad was a different kind of person, but he was just someone who wants to take advantage of people. So, Peter orders Brad to pack his bag and leave with his wife. Peter is literally kicking them out. Brad begs Peter not to kick them out, but Brad loses his temper and hits Peter in the head with a heavy object. Brad grabs Peter and places him in the strange room. Then, he orders Jess to bring something to tie Peter up with. Jess is in shock but obeys her husband in the end. Then, Brad orders Peter to sign a check for $200,000. He says that once the bank transfers the money, Peter will go home with 20% of the total earnings. We don't know whether or not Peter signed the check, because then we see the couple doing the ritual once again. This makes one of the boxes move abruptly. The box opens itself and a shadow figure gets out. This ghost-like creature jumps over Peter. The couple goes to sleep, but when Brad wakes up, he discovers that Jess is bleeding. He takes his wife to the bathroom and finds a mark carved on Jess' back. Brad heads to the room where Peter is being kept. Brad is about to do something with the knife, but he's finding the guts to do it. There, he remembers the traumatic event with his father. It turns out that, when Brad was a child, he brought home a dog. His father didn't want it, so he ordered him to kill the dog with a stick. Of course, Brad didn't move a single muscle, so the father ended up killing the dog in front of Brad. Once the flashback is over, we find Brad stabbing Peter. However, he's not killing him, he's only carving the sacrifice mark on Peter's skin. Brad believes this is the only way the monster or entity goes after Peter, instead of Brad's wife. After carving the sign, though, Brad stabs Peter to death. Then, he covers the body with a blanket and places it inside a huge box. Nonetheless, when the couple is trying to sleep, they hear Peter still alive. When they reach the room, they indeed find Peter. However, he's not the real Peter, but the entity that possessed him. The entity orders Brad to praise him, so Brad has no other choice but to get on his knees. Then, the entity showers Brad with golden coins. Eventually, the couple sells the coins and gets enough money for paying the bills. Brad explains to Jess that the entity guaranteed success in their business as long as Brad provides loyalty. Brad, then, shows his arm, which has been cut open. What seems to be months pass by. We find Jessica is finally pregnant. The couple is expecting a girl. Jess proposes that the girl's name should be Anne, and Brad agrees. Nonetheless, Jess finds a crow's feather inside the cradle. Brad soon realizes that the entity didn't mark Jess. It marked the baby. Lights go out in the house. Brad orders his wife to call the police. Brad goes downstairs and meets the entity inside Peter's body. The entity stabs Brad and kills him. Then, the demon goes after Jess. She was hiding inside a closet. After that, we find the police officers arriving at the house. Eventually, Jess wakes up in a hospital bed. Sadly, she discovers that her baby is missing and that she has a huge wound on her stomach. Jess shrieks with sorrow. In the end, we find Peter sitting on a chair. He stands up, puts his hat on, and leaves.